To understand what happened on the morning of the 28th of February 2026, you have to understand a sequence of decisions made across 8 months, 2 military operations, and 1 failed round of diplomacy. What began as a targeted strike on Iran's nuclear infrastructure had, by early 2026, become something considerably larger in its stated ambitions. A joint American and Israeli campaign designed to dismantle Iran's ballistic missile industry, degrade its military command structure, and create, in the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the conditions for the courageous Iranian people to take their destiny into their own hands. The context begins underground. The Fordow Uranium Enrichment Plant sits 80 to 90 meters beneath a mountain in Qom province. Iran began constructing it in 2006 and revealed the site to international inspectors only after Western intelligence had already detected it. The depth was deliberate. Iran's leadership understood that no fighter aircraft in the Israeli Air Force inventory carried a weapon capable of reaching that cascade haul. That calculation held for nearly 2 decades. It was correct until the morning of the 22nd of June 2025. Operation Midnight Hammer involved 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the entire operational commitment of more than a third of America's 20-strong B-2 fleet. They departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and flew east for 18 hours with minimal radio communications. Crews rotated in the cockpit, rested in shifts, refueled 3 times from KC-135 and KC-46 tankers positioned across Europe and the Azores. When the strike package reached the target area, it joined more than 118 additional aircraft, F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, F-15E, Strike Eagles, and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare platforms. The Growlers and the F-16CJ Vipers carried AGM-88E advanced anti-radiation guided missiles to suppress Iranian surface-to-air radar systems. What Iran's air defense network did not know was that a second group of B-2 bombers had been dispatched westward toward Guam as a deliberate decoy, drawing attention away from the real strike package moving east. At 6:40 in the evening Eastern Time, 2:10 in the morning Iran time, the lead B-2 released the first 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons onto the Fordow facility. The MOP weighs 30,000 pounds. Its warhead case is machined from a special high-performance steel alloy designed to survive impact with reinforced concrete before detonating 200 feet underground. It had never been used in combat before that night. By the time the strike package cleared Iranian airspace, 14 of them had been dropped across Fordow and Natanz. An Ohio-class guided missile submarine somewhere in the Central Command area of responsibility had simultaneously launched more than 24 UGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane told reporters afterward that Iran's fighters did not fly. Its surface-to-air missile systems, according to Kane, did not detect the bombers. The mission was, in his words, flawless. The bombers turned for home. They would not land at Whiteman for another 18 hours. But the program did not die. Iran's nuclear knowledge could not be buried under 30,000 pounds of steel. Its stockpile of 400 kilograms of uranium, enriched to 60% purity, a short step from weapons grade, was reportedly dispersed before the strike. A leaked Defense Intelligence Agency assessment cited by CNN suggested the strikes had largely destroyed above-ground infrastructure, while the core cascade halls may have survived or been evacuated. Trump said publicly the program had been obliterated. The IAEA's Director General, Rafael Grossi, said in February 2026 that Iran's nuclear material was still there, in large quantities. Both statements could not simultaneously be fully accurate. The ceasefire that ended the June 2025 Iran-Israel war came on June 24, 12 days after Israel's first strike. Iran's official count acknowledged at least 610 of its citizens killed. Israel reported 28 dead on its side. No American service members were killed. Iran declared a strategic success. Israel declared a strategic success. Neither declaration was verifiable in the same direction. Escalation. The months that followed the June ceasefire should have been a corridor toward a negotiated settlement. The Trump administration had maintained back-channel communications with Tehran, and by late 2025, the outlines of a deal were taking shape. Iran would agree to limitations on its uranium stockpiles, allow IAEA inspections, and halt enrichment above a specified threshold. In exchange, Washington would provide security guarantees and ease sanctions pressure. 4 rounds of indirect talks were held through Omani intermediaries. The 5th round was scheduled for Muscat in early March 2026. What the negotiators in Tehran did not know, or perhaps underestimated, was what was accumulating in the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean. Beginning in early February 2026, the United States began moving the second of its 2 Nimitz-class carriers into the region, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy's most advanced carrier, and the lead ship of the Ford class, at a construction cost of $13.3 billion, sailed into the Mediterranean alongside its carrier strike group. It joined the USS Abraham Lincoln, already positioned in the Arabian Sea. Together, they represented the centerpiece of an armada that by February 28 would include 14 destroyers, dozens of support vessels, fighter wings, unmanned platforms, and the full complement of standoff strike capability the U.S. Navy can deploy at sustained range. The positioning was publicly visible. Satellite imagery circulated openly. Trump said on February 13 that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could happen. Iran was simultaneously fracturing from the inside. Beginning in late December 2025, mass protests erupted across the country, driven by the collapse of the rial and rising prices. By January 2026, the demonstrations had reached over 100 cities, the largest popular uprising since the 1979 revolution. The government responded with lethal force. Casualty figures from those crackdowns are disputed. The Iranian government acknowledged 3,117 deaths. US-based human rights activists news agency estimated 7,000, and Trump publicly cited 32,000. The precise figure remains unverified and is contested across all sources. What is not contested is that the government used large-scale violence against its own population, and that the streets of Tehran were still not quiet when February 28 arrived. On February 27, one day before the strikes, Oman's foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, announced what he described as a diplomatic breakthrough. Iran had agreed, according to al-Busaidi, to degrade its enriched uranium stockpiles to the lowest possible level and to accept full IAEA verification. He said peace was within reach. 3 days before Iranian and American negotiators were due to meet in Muscat, Israel launched its opening strikes. At 2:30 in the morning Eastern Time on February 28, Trump posted an 8-minute pre-recorded video to Truth Social. The operation was called Epic Fury. Israel called its portion Operation Roaring Lion. The Israeli military stated that dozens of its Air Force fighter jets had completed the opening blow, striking military industries, surface-to-surface missile infrastructure, command and control targets, and additional targets across Iran. IDF spokesman Brigadier General Efi Dafrin confirmed the strikes were executed in full synchronization and coordination with the U.S. military following months of joint planning. The operation began in daylight, not at night, specifically to preserve an element of surprise by breaking from the expected playbook. Engagement. Explosions were reported in Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kermanshah. Strikes targeted Iran's military industries, its ballistic missile launchers and production facilities, command and control nodes, intelligence infrastructure, and government symbols. Satellite imagery captured that morning showed several destroyed and damaged buildings at the compound of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in downtown Tehran. Roads to the compound had already been closed by authorities before the first detonation. What Khamenei's security detail did not know, until it was already underway, was the precise timing of the strikes. Iran had been receiving intelligence about American military movements for weeks. Iranian officials had publicly warned of devastating retaliation. But the specific moment, the angle of approach, the decision to strike in morning light rather than darkness, broke the pattern Iran's planners had prepared for. Khamenei was moved to a secure location. His whereabouts at the time of impact were not confirmed by either side. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed on NBC News that both Khamenei and President Masoud Pezeshkian were alive. Israeli officials, according to a source briefed on the operation, had explicitly targeted senior Iranian political and military leadership. Reports citing Israeli military and regional sources indicated that Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Commander Mohammad Pakpour were likely killed in the Israeli airstrikes. Reuters could not independently confirm these reports, and that caveat matters. In the fog of the opening hours of a major operation, initial claims of leadership kills carry a particular uncertainty. What was confirmed? Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a statement within hours. The IRGC announced it was beginning a broad wave of missile and drone attacks. The retaliatory launch had begun before the Israeli strike packages had fully cleared Iranian airspace. Iran fired waves of ballistic missiles at Israel. Sirens activated across the country. Air raid alerts reached civilian phones in Jerusalem. Trails of smoke marked the sky above Tel Aviv as Israeli interceptor systems Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 3 engaged the incoming salvos. A hospital in central Israel moved operations underground. Schools were closed. Israel declared a 48-hour state of emergency and closed its airspace to civilian flights. Ben Gurion Airport went dark. Iran simultaneously targeted American military installations across the region. Missiles and drones were fired at bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Iraq and Kuwait closed their airspace. Qatar did the same. The Post verified at least one Iranian attack on the U.S. Navy headquarters in Bahrain. Air defense systems in Jordan and the UAE intercepted incoming fire. AFP correspondents in Dubai heard a loud explosion and observed a plume of smoke rising from the city. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the regional headquarters of U.S. Central Command housing thousands of American troops, Iranian missiles were intercepted. No American casualties were reported from any of these strikes. The intercept architecture, shaped by the lessons of the June 2025 war, when American interceptor stockpiles were significantly depleted, held. What Iran's missile operators did not anticipate fully was the degree to which Israeli air defense operations in June had already degraded the Iranian launch infrastructure. Reports from Israeli sources suggested that a significant portion of Iran's ballistic missile launchers had already been destroyed in June 2025. The February 28 salvos were real and they were dangerous. But they were coming from a degraded force. The magazine depth Iran possessed before June 2025 was not the same depth it possessed 8 months later. Inside Iran, the strikes reached places the June war had not. The Israeli campaign under Operation Roaring Lion moved against government symbols, intelligence facilities, and the organizational spine of the IRGC. Trump, in his video address, explicitly called on members of the Revolutionary Guard to lay down their arms in exchange for immunity. He warned those who refused would face certain death. He also addressed Iranian civilians directly, urging them to take over your government. Netanyahu echoed the call. Our joint operation will create the conditions for the brave Iranian people to take their fate into their own hands. For a government that had just violently suppressed the largest domestic uprising since the past. Revolution, the combination of external military pressure and a direct American appeal to the population, was a calculation of a particular kind. Strategic consequence. The strategic logic behind Operation Epic Fury rests on 3 compounding pressures. The first is physical. The missile production facilities, launch infrastructure, and enrichment support architecture that Iran spent decades building are being systematically reduced. The second is institutional. The killing of senior IRGC commanders and the direct targeting of political leadership degrades the command coherence of a system that depends on centralized authority. The third is political. By striking while domestic protests are ongoing and explicitly framing the operation as liberation rather than aggression, the US and Israel are attempting to redefine the meaning of the strikes inside Iran itself. Whether that third layer succeeds is unknowable as the first strikes land. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War assessed, based on the target set Israel chose, that operational regime change was not the primary aim, despite what Trump and Netanyahu stated publicly. The gap between stated goal and operational target set is significant. A government can be destabilized without being replaced. A nuclear program can be degraded without being eliminated. The Arms Control Association noted in a July 2025 assessment that Iran's nuclear knowledge, its centrifuge manufacturing capacity, its third underground enrichment site, and its determination all survived the June operation. Months of enrichment capacity, not decades, was the realistic assessment of what Midnight Hammer achieved. Epic Fury targets a different tier, the delivery systems, not just the production sites. Iran's theory of deterrence rested on several pillars. The first was geographic depth. The distances involved in striking Iran from outside the region make sustained operations costly. The second was asymmetric retaliation. Proxy forces in Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon could threaten US interests and regional partners at scale. The third was nuclear ambiguity. The longer Iran remained on the threshold, the more leverage it accrued. Operation Epic Fury is a direct assault on all three. The US carrier presence demonstrates that geographic depth can be overcome by forward deployment. The degradation of IRGC command structure complicates proxy coordination. And if the missile industry is successfully destroyed, the delivery infrastructure for any eventual nuclear capability is removed, even if the program itself survives underground. More than 14 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz per day in 2025, roughly a third of total worldwide oil exports transported by sea. Iran has threatened for years to close the strait in any major conflict. As of February 28, those threats had not been executed. The Houthis, Iran's most active regional proxy, announced a resumption of attacks in the Red Sea, but the strait itself remained open, and energy markets, while rattled, had not collapsed. That equilibrium was fragile. A single Iranian mining of the strait's navigable channel would trigger a crisis of a different magnitude. The diplomatic path that Oman's foreign minister described as within reach on February 27 was not closed by the strikes in any permanent sense. Talks of some form would resume. They always do. Trump himself indicated that diplomacy on the nuclear program could continue, conditioned on no further enrichment. Iran said it would not negotiate under military duress. That stated position has historically been a starting position, not a final one. The International Atomic Energy Agency, whose inspectors had been effectively sidelined since June 2025, pressed for a return to verification access. Without those inspectors, the status of Iran's remaining enriched uranium, its centrifuge capacity, and its intentions remain opaque to the outside world in precisely the way that creates maximum instability. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session. France and Bahrain jointly requested it. Russia and China condemned the strikes. The United Kingdom did not participate in the military action and called for de-escalation. Ukrainian President Zelensky said the strikes created an opportunity for Iranians to remove what he called a terrorist regime. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez called the military action unjustified. The international alignment was exactly what it had been in every previous escalation, divided along pre-existing axes, moving nothing. This is not the first time a heavily fortified Iranian installation has absorbed American ordnance and left analysts arguing over the wreckage. It will likely not be the last. What Operation Epic Fury represents is the second major military operation against Iran in 8 months, executed by the same alliance, with a stated ambition that has grown considerably beyond the first. Midnight Hammer targeted underground enrichment plants. Epic fury targets the government above ground. That is not a refinement of strategy. It is an escalation in kind. Iran built its deterrence on the assumption that no external power would absorb the costs of direct military confrontation. It built Fordow into a mountain. It buried its centrifuges. It spread its assets. It tolerated decades of sanctions and proxy conflict on the premise that the threshold for outright war was too high to cross. Operation Midnight Hammer crossed it. Operation Epic Fury moved further. What Iran did not build was a theory of victory for the scenario it now faces. That is the weight